And welcome to this episode of Season 5 of the Dr. Tech Show, where myself, Pauline Roche, and Sweyn Hunter, and often guests as we have today, talk about digital topics, including the world of online communications and digital inclusion, in a show which was the brainchild of digital storyteller, the late John Popham. And as usual, we start off with a weather report. Sweyn, how's the weather been this week where you are?
Well, I'm in Kirkwall in Orkney, and it's pretty poor weather, really. It was a lovely, sunny, mild day yesterday, but today it's all dull, overcast, and raining heavily at times. So that's nothing to write home about, I'm afraid.
Oh dear. And Kim, how about you? How's the weather where you are?
I'm in Manchester and it's about normal. Just like, is it raining? Is it warm? Is it cold? Is it hot? Is it cold? I don't know. It's fine.
And here in Birmingham, we've got some blue skies. I've just noticed we have clouds, but blue skies. I was out already this morning at an event in Birmingham City Centre, and yeah, it was nice. It wasn't raining, so that was a real bonus. So thanks, Kim, for joining us today. We'll come on and give you a grand introduction in due course, but first of all, we'll go through some dates and events that are coming up. Swain, do you want to start with the dates?
Okay, I've picked two dates today. I have a feeling both of them maybe. I have a feeling maybe even both of them are today. So I don't
Uh-huh.
know. Let's see. Where can I find them? Here we go. The first one is called White Ribbon Day, and it's a international day that falls on the same time as International uh, International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and it's a global observance dedicated to raising awareness about and taking action to prevent violence against women and girls. And it serves as a reminder of the importance of addressing gender-based violence and promoting gender equality. It's aimed specifically at men. It's certainly in the UK it is, given that it's men whose behaviour needs to change and who have the problems and and do the bad stuff here. So it's an international campaign, and the white ribbon motif is a symbol of men's commitment to ending violence against women. So that's the end. That's that one. And the second one I have is World AIDS Day, which is not today. It's the 1st of December. And everyone knows that World AIDS Day is a thing. Um, but here it comes again on the 1st of December. And it's a global movement to unite people in the fight against HIV and AIDS. Um, in the UK, more than 105,000 people are living with HIV, and globally, estimated 38 million live with the virus. 35 million people or more have died over the past 40 years, making it one of the most destructive pandemics in history. So that's World AIDS Day.
Mm. Two very important days, and well, we hope our listeners and readers find it useful to be reminded of those and feel able to take part in them. Moving on, we have a couple of events that we picked up, and the first one is on Wednesday this week, and it's an event called the Three Generations of Digital Human Rights, and it's taking place in London, 6 to 7 p.m. on Wednesday. And this is a lecture which will address the different processes of adjusting international human rights law to the challenges posed by new and emerging digital technology, including the reinterpretation of existing human rights to cover the needs and interests of individuals impacted by digital products and services, the introduction of new digital human rights, and the expansion of obligations to respect and ensure human rights to technology companies. Ultimately, the blurb on Eventbrite says the lecture will discuss the question of fit between international human rights law created to deal with a specific set of challenges posed by the modern state and the postmodern challenges posed by the political, economic, and technological structures of the digital age. And the speakers are speaker is Professor Yuval Shani, Hirsch Lauterpacht Chair in International Law at the University of Southampton, and is chaired by Dr. Danae Azaria, Associate Professor of Public International Law at the Faculty of Laws, University College London, UCL. And I thought, as we always do on this program, we think about what John would think of that, and I think John would think that was an important lecture to be aware of and bring to people's attention. The second event is in Smethwick, near me in the West Midlands, and this one is about health and digital literacy, again on Eventbrite. And in this on this event, participants will learn about accessing various websites and apps safely and securely to minimize risks of digital threats and develop confidence for using digital device in daily situations. And the content will include daily digital safety fundamentals about identifying and avoiding online scams, health literacy in the digital age, accessing reliable health information online, practical skills about navigating telemedicine platforms, evaluating sources of health information, recognizing and responding to digital health threats, e.g., phishing or malware, and finally, it says setting and tracking health goals using digital tools. So I think a lot of us could learn a lot from that one. I think it's a company called Ideal for All that's running that one. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that and possibly even getting them to run it again for people I
Mm.
work with in Birmingham. And the last event, oh sorry, second last event, we've another one, two more, is at the British Library, also on Friday the 29th, and this is called What Will Survive of Us Symposium. And this is an all-day 10:30 to 4 event at the British Library. It's a special symposium marking the culmination of What Will Survive of Us, a groundbreaking project by Olivier Award-winning artist Kit Green, produced by Enteleki Arts and supported by the National Heritage Lottery Fund. Over the past year, the blurb says What Will Survive of Us has brought together diverse communities through workshops with partners including Towbridge Care Home, Queer Circle, St. Christopher's Hospice, and local communities in Ark in Stockton. The individuals are invited to creatively shape their legacies in the digital age, allowing them to leave behind digital memory bequests that transcend cultural and social boundaries. And the artist Kim Green will lead a discussion on the project's themes, sharing reflections and findings. This is a unique opportunity to engage with topics of death, loss, and legacy, highlighting the intersection of care, end of life experiences, and the arts. And they're going to explore how artistic expression can enhance our understanding of what it means to be human, fostering connections and preserving personal stories. So all are invited to that one, and that sounds like the kind of thing. I don't know whether John got a chance, Sweyn, to preserve his digital legacy, his legacy, before he died, but he certainly had a lot to leave behind. And we hope that this program is part of that legacy. And the last event before we meet Kim formally is Youth in the Digital Age, Global Trends with a focus on Turkey, also on Friday in London, 6 to 7 p.m. And this one, as the blurb says, as digital technologies transform the lives of young people across the globe, profound shifts are occurring in the way young people negotiate their identities. This talk will explore how these new technologies are shaping youth development in general and youth identity development in particular, with a special focus on Turkey. A recent systematic review examined academic research on adolescent identity development, providing comprehensive evaluation and highlighting that scholarly work does not reflect the global distribution of adolescence. Although over 85% of the world's youth live in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, only 15% of studies explore these regions, revealing a critical gap in global perspectives on youth. As more young people encounter curated lives, negative content, and online pressures, early evidence suggests detrimental effects on their social and emotional well-being. Additionally, constant exposure to distressing global news from poverty to climate change adds another layer of stress, complicating how young people develop their sense of self in a hyper-connected yet fragmented world. So this talk will present a conceptual framework for understanding the global impact of digital technologies, including social media and AI, on youth. It will address mental health risks and emphasize the need for inclusive research that considers the digital realities faced by young people in diverse cultural contexts. Lastly, strategies will be suggested to support the next generation as they navigate these evolving digital landscapes. And again, I thought this was the kind of thing that John would have been interested in. Identity in particular. And I know that our friend Rachel Caldecott is also looking at digital identity. She's speaking at several events this week. I saw her on her LinkedIn profile. So yeah. So Kim, do any of those events appeal to you? Are there any of those kind of things you would attend?
I think it's like they all sound really interesting to me. It's hard of picking, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's great to have the choice though, and
yeah,
it's wonderful to
yeah.
have
The
that
one about
opportunity.
three generations of the lecture sounded really interesting to me. I think it's
Mm,
always interesting to see framings of tech that sit outside tech.
yeah, absolutely. More and more. I'd like to see more of that. So, Kim, you're very welcome to the show. Dr. Kim Foale, founder of Geeks for Social Change. Kim is an experienced practitioner working, living, surviving, and thriving at the intersection of tech, research, community, and activism. As founder of Geeks for Social Change, a trans-feminist tech studio and online community, they specialize in cutting through the bluster, looking capitalism in the eye, and finding ways to bring people together to build a better, cozier, more joyful future. Thanks very much for joining us today, Kim. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, it'd be interesting, I think, to hear about your organization and what's happening with it at the moment.
Yeah, so usually I kind of give the potted history as a starting point, which is I think in about it was 2014, 2015. I just finished my PhD. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with it, but it didn't quite feel like this area of study I wanted to stay in. I was doing like websites on the side for like mostly sort of artists, small charities, activist things, that kind of thing. And I was quite disabled. Just I mean, I've always struggled from chronic fatigue for most of my life. And then I was filling the rest of my life with kind of activism stuff. And I was just like, I can't live three lives anymore. I kind of need to live one. And I think the thing is, when at that time, stuff's changed so much since then that sort of things like concepts like tech for good didn't really exist. And I think this idea that say especially charities would have these like huge teams. Most organizations, it was like one person, if they were lucky, who was probably doing something else. So a lot of it was just the work we did back then was very much like setting up these way over specified sites that kind of tried to do everything and didn't really succeed at much in things like Drupal, which is what we used to do. And I think after a while of doing these sites that were always a bit under budget, well, way under budget for what people want nowadays, and kind of, clicking things, you're just like, is any of this actually doing what organizations need?
Mm.
And kind of, that, and there's a huge market now for just like, charities who want to spend 100K, a million on their website. And it's like, it didn't really feel like there's an internal theory of change for that. You know what I mean? So I started Geeks for Social Change. It was originally a meetup group. I just put an event Brighton and people turned up, and I found pretty quickly. And again, this is 10 years ago now, but ideas of sort of like qual versus quant in social science hadn't really percolated through. I think a lot of the research now that people take for granted in terms of I think it's still quite in its early days, but like situating products around research that's done was quite early.
Mm.
So they ran for a bit and it was interesting, but I was like, okay, what next? So I actually ran a reading group for a bit after that, which went for 3 years. So we had a little group and we got our way we worked our way through all kinds of different stuff. I think the most influential one was actually one of the first reads we did, which was Ursula Franklin's Real World of Technology, which is just amazing. We'll maybe talk about that a little bit better.
Mm.
And then from that, I got invited to take part in the project for Place Cow, which is,
Mm.
I assume someone will get to, which is our studio's biggest project, which had me working with my now long-term colleague and friend, Professor Stefan White at Manchester School of Architecture. And it was kind of a real opportunity to a research-led, community-led, ground-up piece of tech work. And from that, we then developed the approach we're now using for everything, which we called the Community Technology Partnership. We developed that software. We've had some other successes, and kind of, and then I think the story after then is we were just doing way too much. So, the last few years we've had two big projects end, which and our biggest funder decided they don't want to exist anymore.
Oh.
So, we started the year with 11 staff and now it's back to just me again. And we're
Oh.
sort of slowly going to start building it up again now based on like what we've learned, what we know, and all the rest of it. So I think that's like the little potted history of where we got to now. Did that answer the
Mm.
original question? I can't
Yeah,
remember what it was now.
absolutely. Absolutely. It's fascinating um, to hear, that you've been going for 10 years. How did lockdown affect things?
Awfully, to be honest. So Place Cow, this project we talked about, it was based in a piece of research in my neighborhood to do it was asset-based community development,
Mm.
place-based funding for older people. And one of the questions that came out of that huge piece of research was you know, what would make your area more age friendly? age friendly being a World Health Organization initiative about over 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And people are like, oh, there's nothing to do. And we were like, well, what is there to do? So the 4 community development workers for each of the 4 wards it was based in went out and just made a list. And that was like a ridiculously huge list. And everyone was kind of like, there's so much. So then, of course, when it came down to it, it's like, oh, well, no one can find the information about what's happening, which I think anyone who's tried to do any community level work knows well, right?
Yeah.
Big organized stuff. Even then, you usually have to go on the website to find out about it, right? Like, the theaters and the concert venues. But then anything that's like a coffee morning or an irregular meetup or just something that happens in those things, which are probably like 95% of neighborhood activity, weren't being published anywhere.
Mm.
So effectively we were like, okay, well, we need to work on the ground to fix this situation. So we were like, well, who's the organizers? Can we work with them? They're presumably keeping a diary somewhere, might be on paper, might be in their head. Most of the time it's in a Google or an Outlook calendar. And we basically supported them to publish that and then made some software that like tied it all together and then republishes it all in one place. So instead of having, most of the information doesn't exist at all. Some of it you would have to check the websites every day. We have one source of information. And that was great. And it was really well. We did some winter festivals in 2018, 19, where we were able to put together a huge flight. This was my idea of high tech. We put together a flyer with 16 different groups events on and put it through people's doors, across the whole neighborhood.
Mm.
And then lockdown hits. And what have we got? We've just got a project we've spent several years on about getting older people to meet up in real life.
Mm.
So the whole thing crashed and burned. And, the fund, I think anyone who's tried to do a project for a while too knows how the funding objectives are always changing.
Yeah.
But like, and even then we were like, okay, we have an unprecedented access to the groups in the area, which we think are necessary for any interventions. And we just couldn't get anywhere with any of the funders. I think they were all so focused on immediate day to day
Yeah.
right now
Yeah.
that there's, and I think that's what's plagued us all along a little bit, that, no one's ever seems to be thinking more than 6 months ahead. So it's
Yeah.
really hard to engage with a project that's about sort of like root and branch digital inclusion, tech renewal, all the rest of it. And I think now we started bouncing back a little bit. Like some of I think, I mean, the problem we're dealing with now is just like cuts to everything across the board, but people are going out again. I mean, I think a lot of the COVID protection at the moment is like non-existent, which is really scary. It's like in some ways it's worse now than then in some ways. So yeah, we're kind of bouncing back a little bit, but I think the world's changed, hasn't it? The world's
Mm.
changed.
Mm. And yeah, I mean, what are some of the changes that you see that you like or don't like? Either end of the spectrum. What's good? What's good?
Hmm.
What's working? What's not good?
Well, for our money, I think there's always this slight, it's kind of the Whiggish idea of history that stuff's always improving, isn't it? But actually, we've noticed a definite decline in the capacity that groups have got. You
Mm.
think through the COVID years, there's less groups around doing less stuff. And whereas before they might have been discoverable through a Facebook group or that was kind of best case before, really, was that they had a Facebook group. But now there's so many groups that they've gone to either you just have to know that they have a WhatsApp group and be in it, and everyone's in death by WhatsApp right now. Or like for I think more like groups that millennials run tend to be like an Instagram profile. So they're like literally undiscoverable.
Mm.
And I think it's because and so much of this is just because of the design of big tech, which is all switched to video. So like, we did me and my colleague who runs used to run a local community pub, we did a podcast about this because, I think 10 years ago, you'd put an event on Facebook events and
Mm.
your friends would all see it.
Mm.
You could send it around, people go, and sure, we got a bit overwhelmed with it. There was lots of people doing it, but it was like probably the easiest it's been for promoters. I mean, maybe MySpace was another time when it was really easy. I used to put on music, Ladyfest festivals, they're like DIY music festivals. And all people had to do to apply to be at them was just send their MySpace link and it had a bit about the band, some of their music. You could just press play. It was all in one place. It wasn't trying to sell you anything past that. And so now it just feels way worse. Like our starting ground is way lower. And I think everyone's been struggling for a long time now. So it's made everyone quite insular, I think. And the idea of doing something more outward facing seems to be a bit like, oh, I don't know about that. There's like, I feel like everyone's now living more divided lives than they were before. It's my feeling. I don't know if have
Mm.
you experienced the same or?
To some extent, I mean, I agree with the lack of events and stuff. Like Meetup used to be the place where you could find, like fellow travelers, and now I don't think it started to charge for things and stuff, so it was more difficult. All these things that had a freemium model suddenly are charging. Like even Google Mail now is trying to make you pay for your storage. Um, but yeah, I would say I would agree that I think things have got more difficult to find. Ironically, because it felt like during lockdown, everybody was exploring technology and using technology more, but I don't know that it went in the wide open direction that John and others would have liked. Um, yeah, we mentioned it. We talked before the show about John Popham, by the way. Do you think you met John during your
I
career in
feel like I
tech,
have, but I
Jim?
can't put
Yeah.
my finger on it.
Okay.
I've
Okay.
got a friend who knows him better than me. I'm going to ask them about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. We're always keen to kind of talk about John and kind of keep his memory alive and kind of have people on the show who knew John because he did so much and he would have been set front and center at all the things during COVID and lockdown. And now I feel like someone, thoughtfulness of someone like him would have been really helpful. Um, who are some of the people that you kind of you mentioned an author there, Kim. Are there other people that you kind of respect and sort of look to for guidance and leadership in this field?
Oh, that's a big question, isn't it? I'd have to have a think about that. So a lot of it's local colleagues, like my friend Rachel Avaroa, who used to run the Old Abbey Tap House till recently. It's been a huge inspiration on a lot of this stuff. I think and just this sort of commitment to bottom up work. Just like what do people need now? Just putting people in the room, and it gets called 20 different things by the authorities and the funders, but
Mm,
the work on the ground remains the same. I
mm,
think, yeah, Ursula Franklin, who I mentioned, she was a Canadian physicist, and wrote this. There's a series of lectures, which is the nicest way to listen to it, but there's a
mm.
book form called The Real World of Technology, and the fundamental thing she did is, um, there was
Oh,
a
there we
yeah,
go.
there you
Yeah.
go.
Hmm.
She describes two forms of technology. There's holistic and prescriptive technology. So a holistic technology is where it's sort of the person controls the process. So if you're in a pottery studio and you're making pots, you might not all go out and dig up the clay together, but after that, everyone's kind of making the parts, putting the pot together, doing it on the thing, firing it, coloring it, right? It's like a parallel process. No one's going to a pottery studio to like automate it. But
Mm,
then equally in industry, it is the opposite. So there is a production line and people do the stages. And then the output is then about efficiency and the management controlling it. And it's the same with computers. So I think a lot of what we were sold on in terms of the liberatory value of computing was you can make a poster, you can make music, you can do all these things on it. And in some ways they've been amazing for that. But then what the prescriptive version of is a network of computers. Prescriptive computing is a network of computers where actually what's being happening is the boss can manage it. Right. So there's a couple things that go side by side here. So one of them is I think a lot of the tech that's grown up in the last few years has been very corporate controlled, very top down, and it's sort of there's been this real push to have all our tech controlled by these big five companies, right?
mm, mm,
Who own the means of production. And so the thing we heard a lot was like, I'm not a tech person, right? But actually, it's like we're all using computers, 8, 10, however many hours a day you want to admit to. So are we not tech people, or have we just, or has the design of these pieces of software by big tech just made us not made us feel like we're not tech people? And I think this Ursula Franklin example is perfect like that for
mm.
me. When you're one of however many billion Gmail users, you're just a thing on a spreadsheet to
Yeah.
raise money. I will have a think about other influential
Mm.
people and maybe
Yeah.
mention them later. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I think it's always interesting to hear about things that have been written. I hadn't heard of Ursula Franklin, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna follow that up and use my local public library maybe to investigate if there. We're very keen on public libraries on this show. Um, so yeah, are there um so including your organization, are there other organizations that you network with and sort of do stuff with, and who are they?
Yeah, so right now this is what we're working on the most actually, and this is our big outstanding funding bid, is we kind of realize like, there's a bunch of studios doing really good work at the moment, but we all get forced into this pattern of like, a lot of it's client studio relationship, which isn't the best one for because you tend to make things that fit the shape of existing organizations and you're not really thinking about the new thing. Um, and then we're all kind of working in parallel and like we like and respect each other's work, but practically when it comes down to it, we're all kind of competing for the same clients a lot of the time, and we don't have any of that space to actually work together and see who we could. I mean, we try, right?
Mm.
So at the moment, we've got this little group together who are working on thinking through some of these issues. So there's us, there's a studio called there's a co-op studio called Common Knowledge in London who have done some stuff around electoral data. They're really keen to connect up. But they've literally got it in their title, right? Like common knowledge. We want to
Yeah.
make information commons is here. There's a co-op who do infrastructure hosting, that kind of thing, called Autonomic, who we're working with. So again, try and make alternatives to you know, we're trying to host that, we host our own social media. We've got a Mastodon account. We're now hosting our own email lists, and we're trying to sort of move more towards that, like detaching ourselves from it. The other groups we're working with there's Tipping Point, who are a big national network of climate justice groups who
Mm.
run some of their own tech offers, and Resilience Web, who are kind of another um they've got another thing where they've got a web service that helps you bring together coalitions around ideas of like donor economics and that sort of thing.
Yeah, we're hoping to have Charlie on the program in due
Cool.
course. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
Great.
Dinair is the person
Mhm.
we've been chatting to. So
Yeah.
hopefully if we win this funding bid, this national lottery we're going for. I mean, you shouldn't talk about it out loud, do you? It feels like bad luck. But we'll have a bunch to work together. And actually, like the main thing I'm really excited about, like I obviously want to continue developing our own stuff, but
Mm.
what I'm most excited about is actually trying to start a network where it's like, can we just all try each other's stuff in our own local context too, so that we're not
Excellent.
all just like on our own fighting our own battles? Because I think really like in economic terms, the site, we started calling it like left tech, like materialist left technology. We'll come up with something snappier. Maybe it's like left tech. But like for any of this to work, we need to like 10x, 100x, 1000x the size of this sector. Like it's hard to really comprehend what a hold big tech has over us right now, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think you find a home, or have you found a home in the Tech for Good ecosystem, or do you feel you're alongside, or where are you? Do you think you are in terms of that?
No, honestly, I've never really found a home for myself in tech. It's a bit of a strange one, but I think really I've been doing community development and tech's just been the tool I've been doing it with.
Mm.
So it's
Mm.
hard to know because obviously there's questions of like, is it like a transphobia thing? Is it because I'm anti-capitalist? Is it because of like all the above? But yeah, we like literally never get invited to talk at tech events. And I think it's because a lot of the context, right, especially where I live in Manchester, there's actually like it's kind of hard to get away from funding from the arms industry specifically,
Right.
from like the banks and everything else. Like that
Mm.
they're I think Manchester especially is very integrated in the arms and military movement now in ways that are really scary. Like, there's an event the other week at it was a AI ethics event sponsored by an arms company who did the
Ooh.
guidance for for like drones used in Gaza.
Wow.
So it doesn't really surprise me we don't get invited. But then we do get invited to like the activist thing and the community thing and everything else. And sometimes you just, it's a bit duck logic, isn't it? If it looks
Yeah.
so, and I
Yeah.
think, it's not to like downplay the importance of that scene. It's just been interesting seeing how I think a lot of that movement is about good accessibility and it's about making websites for charities. And those things need to happen, right? Websites should be accessible. There should be websites for charities, but equally, like, I'm not exactly gonna, get myself out of bed in the morning to go to the Department of Work and Pensions hackathon. That doesn't strike me as tech for good. That strikes me as tech for actually something that kills millions of people,
Yeah. I exploitation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah, not something that we would subscribe to either. What we are both involved in is Open Data Camp. You might have heard of it. We helped run those unconferences around the country. We're in fact talking about Open Data Camp 10 now. We're kind of on our 10th iteration of that. but you know, that's about working with people who want to work in the open, want to share things, want to make things, you know, better by working together. Um, so it's good to hear that you have possible collaborators as well. Can I ask you, Kim, about your kind of earlier career, or if you like, or your life around tech, and what shaped you from being as a young person, you know, that brings you to where you are today?
It's a really good question. I don't know. I guess I've got the typical thing where I'm kind of, what do they call it now? Late diagnosed autistic, even though I think historically we're some of the earliest people to be diagnosed, but so, and I was kind of I suppose like a quite unwell kid living in suburbia, and a computer bought home one day, and there was that, I think I just decided that was the thing I wanted to be on. And then I think at some point it like probably decided it was quite uncool. And so there's like a bit of a gap. And then I think I got back into it at some point. But it was always one of those weird skills where I just I so took it for granted that I kind of had that. Um, and then I guess like, I got really radicalized when I moved to Leeds and got quite involved in the squatting scene, and found out really quickly about the climate movement at the time. And there's a group called Queer Mutiny that I think forever changed me, kind of gave me the context I needed to be who I am today. And it was like, all right, okay, now there's like a purpose for it. And I
Mm.
suppose that's always been my thing. It's just like, it's in the name for the studio. I didn't realize when we named it, but it was like, I'm a geek for social change. I'm not a geek for turning an LED off and on, or like installing Linux on a fridge, or like whatever
Mm-hmm.
else. Like, if people want to do that, fine. But like that's not, you know what I mean? And I think I suppose that like there's kind of like a utopianism in there, I suppose also I always forget this part, but my little family claim to fame is that my granddad invented conveyor belts that go around corners.
Oh,
Wow.
now that is a claim to fame.
Yeah.
And yeah, he was a socialist and had this factory. So I think that like really rubbed off on me too. So there's always been this like little inventory thing in like at least our family. I don't know. My parents say it skipped a generation, but I'm not sure. And I think just combined with just being off on disabled, I didn't realize till actually I've started filling out my PIP form recently, which I really realized I needed. But I realized I've just kind of adapted my life to be things I can do. And what I can do is stuff on my computer at home in my own time. And what I can't do is go into an office every day, like so that was an interesting revelation too. So I suppose all these pieces have come together, and I think maybe just a bit of pigheadedness, and just like no, 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 that's bullshit, that's bullshit. Let's go on this line here. There we go.
Yeah. So, I want to ask you about your PhD, and I will
Yeah.
also want to ask you about the Place Cal and other projects that you've worked on. So, um, tell us about the PhD first. Thing. What was
Mhm.
that in, and how was it for you?
So I did a PhD. It was called a listener-centered approach to soundscape evaluation, and effectively it was about how people perceive the sounds of the built environment they're in. So it's kind of analogous to a landscape, but in sound. Um, So it was quite a sort of new area when I like dipped into it, but it was still very dominated by the acoustics profession, who are the people who did it. Because they sort of, there's a realization in acoustics, which is a very sort of numbersy profession, that, a dripping tap in the middle of the night is incredibly annoying, even though it's not very loud. And like a concert is great when you're going for a concert. So the main thing I learned from this actually is I basically did a purely qualitative PhD, sociology PhD in the acoustics department. So I think the main thing it really taught me was just like making justifications for things outside their usual comfort zone. So like explaining the benefit of a sociological process to someone who's very into numbers was quite interesting. And it
Mm.
actually like, well, it's kind of annoying at the time. Afterwards, you realize you've actually learned to sort of like really like interrogate your assumptions, and then, make something really good. But yeah, I think that came out of like, a lot of my education was about I just got into weird music. And so that ended up being like the obvious PhD option. But I think when I finished it, the acoustics industry wasn't really one for me, it was just it was interesting, and I would have maybe done a postdoc, but then I just got dragged into the activist sphere that I was already in. Yeah.
Mm. And so, are any of the things that you covered in your PhD, are they something that you do now, or is it something you've just got in the background?
No, there's a big postdoc project I'd like to do, but it's just I think the other thing I've learned recently is you only do one thing at once. So I suppose like the one-page summary of my PhD was basically that most people don't really think about the sound environment most of the
Mm.
time, and if they do notice it, it's because it's either too loud or too quiet, and then it's either positive or negative. So there's not really like an in-between one. So there's like four quadrants there. So like positive loud is about like you know, going to a gig, having a great time. Negative loud is like, can these people shut up next to me? Positive quiet is what a lot of noise abatement stuff's gone on, but the feeling of serenity. But actually there's also negative quiet, which is feelings of loneliness.
Mm.
But what the real follow-on I wanted to do was there was a feeling in my PhD field work. So I had 30 people who kept a diary and analyzed all the results, was that most places like cafes, bars were too loud most of the time. So the entire postdoc project is just going to be putting a device in these places in like bars and venues that says how loud it is, and people can give feedback if it's too loud or too quiet, and maybe turn up or down in real time. But I think the biggest advantage is you'd be able to just go, I need to have a quiet meeting. Where can I go right now that's quiet?
Mm.
And I think especially as you start to get a bit older and you notice your hearing
Mm.
sensitivity goes up. So that's the big postdoc project I'd love to do.
Interesting.
I mean, I've got a slide. I made a slide deck for it the other day, just so it's there if anyone
Yeah.
wants to fund me to do that. But
Yeah.
it feels like a really quick win, and it would also fit into a sort of established venture capital model that most of my other projects don't. But it's just like not going to prioritize that anytime soon, I don't think.
Mm.
No, it sounds really interesting. I mean, I did a project years ago on my website, a directory of cafes in Birmingham that had and their opening times, because often people wanted to meet in cafes but didn't know
Yep,
what time they were open or closed, and that was always very popular with the tech crowd because they were the ones who mainly wanted to kind of meet later in the evening. So, yeah, I like passion
Mm.
projects like that because they speak to you and they help you and they help other people as well. So well done on that. Yeah, I'd love to see that funded. I really
cool.
would.
Thank you.
Um, you mentioned funders before. What are there specific thoughts you have about funders and what they should be doing, what they're not doing, that you would wouldn't mind sharing with us? Because it's always useful
Ooh.
to think about them. Or do you want to not? I know it's a tricky subject because they're the ones who ultimately decide whether or not to give you the funding. Have you had
Yeah,
some
let's skip
good
that one for now.
experiences?
I'm not sure
Okay, we'll
what they
park
should be
that one.
doing. I tell you one thing I think they should be doing,
Uh-huh.
which is identifying the people who are being harmed the most by the current climate and funding them on their own terms, which right now is trans people and migrants and people of color, I would
Yeah.
say. And
Mm.
also, yeah, like traveler groups. It always feels like those groups are having to fit into the context of other people's funding requirements, and we're always seen as like done tos, not people who are part of
Mm.
fixing the solution. I think that's my big frustration.
Mm.
And there's some funders, I won't name names, but they put their data on 360 Giving, and you can see they funded 300 groups and zero trans groups, and it's like, what's
Mm.
going on? Have you turned the news on in the last 3 years? Like, so that's my big thing, I would say.
Mm. Okay.
Quite see
Well,
where
I think
that's,
it's
yeah,
very
talk to the people who are having the harm done to them because they know more than you about the problem, actually. Sorry.
that's really helpful, Kim. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. Um, we talked about something else that you were going to talk about. Oh, PlaceCal. Yeah, the
Yeah.
projects that you've worked on. I'm really interested in that, both from this show point of view and also possibly following up at some stage. So this is your website. Swain has on the screen. So PlaceCal is one of the
Yeah.
projects there. Yeah.
So I think I described the genesis of this earlier, which came out of this age-friendly research project. So yeah, placecal.org is the main domain name, but it's kind of easiest to start with our transdimension.uk is the if you instead of that one,
Transdimension.uk.
go to just transdimension.uk.uk. Yeah. So this is perhaps the easiest way to show it. So if you go to the partners page here at the top, so so this came out of, we did this work at Gender Intelligence, who are I think now the biggest trans charity in the UK. And they were realizing they were getting bigger and bigger, but they didn't want to sort of be this sort of like huge mega charity while every other group is a mutual aid group with zero money, right?
Mm.
but it's really hard to like map out these networks. So you can scroll down and have a look at some of these groups. So we did a poll on Twitter of people who followed them before.
Mm.
And I think the median number of groups that people had, trans groups that people had heard of who followed gender intelligence, who are already very online on Twitter, was 3. So just by like working with them, going around, we trawled every website, everything else. We found this enormous list. I think there's over 50 on here now of groups, which is already just like a huge queue to have them in one place. And now this is like actively managed. So actually, the work you said you did earlier about the opening times,
Mm.
that's like they're the people that we need to do this work with. They're the
Mm.
people who are invested enough in an area that they're willing to do this work, to do this connecting up work. And then basically for each of these groups, all they have to do is publish a calendar using anything. So it could be Google, Outlook,
Mm-hmm.
Meetup, Eventbrite, OutSavvy, Dice. Like there's a bunch of platforms we support. And if we can't, we'll write more filters if we need them. And then if you scroll to the top again and go to events, you can see this is what I was describing earlier, where you can now see all of these all in one
Mm.
place. So this is just
Mm.
today, right? And this has absolutely blown everyone's mind. There's a lot of people who knew about like one event a month and they'd like commute into it from outside London.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all completely automatic. And this is the thing that's wild about it.
Love this.
But actually, like, so this is like our most polished thing. But the
Mm.
way that PlaceCal works, so this is just like a custom front end we've
Yeah.
made for like one
Mhm.
community of place and interest.
Mm-hmm.
But the way the PlaceCal backend works is that so we based the whole thing around these. We call them community technology coordinators. That will be your role. And people are already doing this work, right? So some of it's mother and parent, mother and child group. Some of it's like, say, people independent music venues. Some of it's things like there's a women's social enterprise network we've been working with, or like or a grant funder network. So but everyone's in multiple overlapping networks. So the way the backend works is once the partner's been added and had their calendar connected, they can then be just added into these partnerships that have a curator that manages them.
Mm.
And at the moment, all this work goes on spreadsheets that tend to go out of date the second the person doing the job gets bored of it or moves on, or like, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Or their kids
Yeah.
grow up or they get ill or a number of other things. And because we've made it so that it's just like publish once, share anyway, we can now make a site and that's what we're working on at the moment. We're expanding this to Manchester, but it's like, then if someone wanted to do a generic LGBT events listing in Manchester, they could do that too. If someone's got an organization, they want to pull it in to their website, they can do that too. The networks we're in can go, oh, that. So it's just sort of like we think, or I hope that it's effectively what we're building here is something akin to another Wikipedia, where it's just like such an obvious de facto thing that you list your stuff on there because it's easy, automatic, and we give you a little bit of training. So these are the networks. So in fact, the rightmost one there's the most developed, the
Uh-huh.
climate justice one that our friend Rakesh has been doing. So this has pulled together all the climate and migrant justice stuff in the Northeast. But equally, this could be a climate justice and a migrant justice site. So basically, when it pulls it in, it like geocodes it to a ward. So you can then select when you build these front end sites, what region and what interest you want to stack on top of each other. And I think between those two things, community of interest and community of place, that's like basically everything we work with. So it's a big ambitious thing. The problem we have is that the pitch takes that long. Not very elevator
Yes.
pitchable. I think the people who see the benefit of this are the people who tried to do this 3 times already and it's not worked. Because actually we end up in a lot of funding contexts where the people making the decisions don't know anything about community development work or about tech, and we're trying to sell them something that's like both and neither, and
Yes.
also its own new thing, and
Mm.
also we're saying it won't be controlled by you. You're contributing to a commons that's owned by
Yeah.
a non-profit CIC.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
That's
But
brilliant, Kim. That is
oh,
just so heartwarming. It sounds trite, but it is to see definite useful tech stuff because you see so much, sort of shiny, glossy. It'll be useful for 5 minutes to somebody, and they want to make money out of it. Whereas you're doing things that genuinely help communities, and
thanks.
obviously some very underserved communities here as well. So, like, what are your what do you want to do if you had all the money in the world or all the resources in the world? What would your plans be for this? this
Yeah, it's
project?
interesting. So there's two sides that we're working on at the moment. So one is the biggest problem we have with trying to sell this is that, people have just been sold 100 magic bullets over the last however many years. And
So
like
what? Sorry.
100 magic bullets. This
Oh
is
yeah,
all
yeah,
tech is
yeah,
sold nowadays as a magic
yeah,
bullet. And it's
yeah.
all sold, for most tech teams now, their sales team is bigger than their tech team. And it's just like it's all sold based on the shiny experience. And it's usually pitched at like one specific person in IT.
Yeah.
So overcoming that's a really big thing. And we're trying to work on basically a white paper around this. Just sort of outlining our position on tech and how we're not going to really undo anything until people start to ask like basic research questions about like what are we commissioning, why, what are the needs of our organization, how does this fit into our theory of change, which is the consultancy we do with organizations too. And then the other side of it is this tech, it's been it's a little bit of a battle zone in some ways because we started it in about 2018 to fix specific problems and it's been added to, but we've so much struggled with getting consistent funding for it that it's now in a state where like honestly, if I had unlimited money, maybe we just start rebuilding it from the ground up because it's like, but like it's fixable, but it's like it it's just really hard. Like, because in a venture capital model, you have, where you're going to sell it for profit later, you have 3, 5 years, you have the
Mm.
team, you can build something. And it's very much we're just like trying to feel our way through it. So, I mean, yeah, the main thing we really need from it is just consistent funding from it. And that's, we're waiting on a decision from the lottery, like I said, to do
Mm.
some funding towards it. But really, like, we're looking for someone who wants to take it on. So we've had chats with various bits of Manchester City Council about it. We could talk to other city councils, but we're really just looking for that, like, someone who recognizes this approach is the right one and has the resources to be a bit experimental and let us try it out with them. It's
Yeah.
nearly at the point we can run it as a social enterprise,
Mm.
but it feels like that the gap feels a little bit unsurmountable right now, but we're a lot closer than we were a few years ago.
I can see the potential. Are you in touch with Cormac Russell, who does the ABCD training around the world?
I'm not actually, but we are in touch with the C2 network. I don't know if you know them. C2 Connecting Communities do a lot of this. This is also
Mm.
the genesis for some of this work came from that network. Do you think, yeah, you think I should get in touch then? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think because
Yeah.
it's clearly come from the grassroots. It answers a need. It as Cormac says, it focuses on what's strong, not what's wrong in a community. So yeah, all positive things, and yeah,
Oh,
anything I can do to support that, I'd be really interested because
please.
it's a no-brainer. I'm sure Swain, you can also see the merits of it in other
Absolutely.
places. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. All
Mm,
Uh,
sorts of ideas sort of pinging around in my head at the moment.
mm,
Cool.
yeah,
I think
definitely.
introductions are great. The problem we have is I think like a lot of these projects, we have a lot of potential leads and interesting things and not the time to do it. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
variously at the moment, I've got on my list to like make a proper business plan outlining how it could work, to like redo the marketing page on the homepage, which isn't quite right at the moment, to like fix a couple of critical bugs that people are facing. And it's just like, we've got a few requests for training and we need to figure out how we're going to deliver that now. And it's just like, oh my God. So I
Yeah.
think prioritizing is the hardest challenge in this, I
Yes,
think.
absolutely.
Because yeah,
It's
the
funny
introductions are great.
you should say about training because I was just thinking, I could add you to several lists of people looking for training in a community oriented way because so many um other organizations they offer training but they want to sell you something or they don't see the underlying value of an organization. So it's
Cool.
yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
good to
Yeah, that
know
would be
other
great.
good people in the space. Yeah. So what's your plans for the next 5, 10 years, or do you look forward that much?
At the moment, that's what we're thinking about a lot. Yeah, I think a lot of my politics right now, I'm trying to figure out like how to kind of again unify things a little bit. And I think actually survival is becoming one I'm increasingly thinking about. It's like
Mm,
it's not just that the world's getting more unequal and the climate justice and the climate's it's like accelerating, right? And it feels like this is what's really scary to me right now is that everyone I know who's doing great on the ground grassroots work to try and make the world livable, survivable, is scrabbling around for funding. And everyone who's doing the most evil shit imaginable seems to be like funded to the ends of the earth to do that and has their own private nuclear bunker. So I'm really scared. And I think like I think that especially in the next 10 years, like food shortages are already starting, right? Things like this, toxicity of the environment's rising. So I think for us, like the main thing that we want to start doing in the new year is just event series, much like this one, to try and bring some community around. Because I think the thing we underestimated too is just this work that we're trying to do here. It's prefigurative, right? So we're trying to build the kind of world we want to live in, but that also means you need the space and the capacity to do a thing. And most of the groups we're trying to work with don't have the mental capacity, even if they can see something will be good for them.
Mm.
Like everyone's so struggling for like the next week's rent, the next month's, the next 6 months. So I think that's the main thing is we just have to make the supportive community around like creating a gentle space for these tech alternatives because they're going to be they're going to be needed,
Mm.
and we'll probably start to see things like grid failures going forward as well, right? So it's interesting. Like I've actually registered to get my radio license in the new year because I think that might be a thing we start to need. But yeah,
Mm. Yeah,
and
we had this program was repeated on a local community radio station during lockdown because we felt people needed to know about technology, and there was a one doing in Birmingham. So yeah, I think radio is a great shout. Sorry, I
yeah,
interrupted you.
no, that was about it. So I'm
Mm.
saying I'm pretty scared about the way the world's going. Honestly, I think it's and especially with like the people who I don't like to talk about them too much, but the people who now have their hands on various nuclear buttons in other very large countries are not the people you want to have them, are they? So, but I don't know. I think it's hard doing this work because out of these catastrophes is sometimes when the most inspirational stuff happens. But yeah, right now just something's not adding up for me. I can't believe the people who are trying to make the world barely habitable, like I say, are like struggling or even having to apply for funding. There should just
Yeah,
be like the single thing that our species is funding us to do is to make the world livable for us. And yet, you know,
yeah,
how
yeah.
are you
You're
feeling
absolutely
about
right.
it? Are you more positive than me or?
Well, I mean, I'm an Irish woman in England, so I've lived with challenges and bias and stereotypes for a long time. But um, I just find it easier to be optimistic. I don't know
Hmm.
whether that's kind of a cop out, but yeah, I kind of because I do programs like this, because I meet people like Sweyn, other people involved in the open data world, open source people. I keep hoping that my way of seeing things and the people, these my comrades will prevail. And I meet people like you, Kim, and that's very hopeful. I find the people we invite on the show generally have a great story to tell and are very optimistic, or at least have a vision that's for a better world. So yeah, Swain, what's your outlook on this?
No, very much so. I mean, I think the focus on survival is it, you've put into a word there something that's been floating around in my head, very much so, both in the terms that you speak about it, but also the climate, the world as a whole. There's an awful lot of quite obviously sensible things,
Hmm.
or things that are quite obviously equitable and good, that just, as you say, don't tend to get off the starting blocks. And that's something that you'd like to think that something like Place Cal and other kind of technological tools for those who are trying to work together in that sort of space, you'd hope that they could have a real impact.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think I like survival as an overall heading because it's just an extreme goal, and that means something different if you're a Palestinian, if you're a trans person, if you're a migrant, if you're on a low income, if you're a 90-year-old who's just lost the, fuel allowance. It's just like it, but also the planet. I think it's quite a focus for me. And I think, especially again, when you're in a marginalized group, it's like you get like a preview. So, like a decent percentage of trans people have to buy their medication with cryptocurrency off, various sites. I won't go into the details, but it is, and we have to get community healthcare from each other. But this is coming for everyone. And this
Mhm.
is the main thing we want to get into people's heads, right? It's like a tiny percentage of people's that's been very easy to marginalize, but bit by bit this will happen to everyone. So it's by again, I think it just comes down to my central focus of like by starting by looking at what's happening to the most marginalized and assume that's coming for you, you know.
The Pastor Niemeyer poem about the Holocaust, comes to mind. They came for everybody else, and then
Yeah.
eventually they do come for us. So it's in our own vested interest to look out for that. I like I mean, like sounds wrong in this context, but like you talk about tech and sustainability, and like in my world, I work for a charity, and I do work to on digital inclusion in neighborhoods, and I'm getting torn at the moment between wanting people to use technology so they can have better lives, but knowing that the use of technology consumes so much resources that you know it's a real challenge now. I can see the two things pulling against each other, and I think you have a awareness of that as well, Kim.
And I think fundamentally, it feels like we shouldn't have to use this much technology, right? So I think it's funny, like one of the things we say to the council, and they don't tend to like it, is digital exclusion is usually caused when there's an existing face-to-face service that people liked or tolerated, and then it's made into a crappy web form. And then, oh, you're digitally excluded. You need the digital exclusion training. And it's like, no, actually, we just want the human back.
Yeah.
And it's happening en masse right now, right? And it's like it's such a weird sleight of hand. Actually, it's just exclusion using digital as a tool to do so. And I think, it's like ordering anything online nowadays, right? I know we moan about it, but the amount of emails you get, and it's like, just send me the thing. You know? Or I think also I mean, especially in the age-friendly context, right? This rise in things like contactless payment and QR codes to order in restaurants, like it feels like it's just becoming increasingly hostile. And like we keep saying with this emphasis on the, means of production, it's so that it can put everything in this context that's about the surveillance of the situation rather than thinking about what makes the situation nice, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Great. Kim, we're going to have to just take a final story because the last week's was the publication of the Lloyds Bank Consumer Digital Index. I want to include a clip from about that in the final minutes of the program. But if people want to contact you after the program, where's the best place to find you these days?
I feel like I spread myself too thin, but I've been enjoying Blue Sky this last couple of weeks, of which I'm just kim.town, like a town full of Kims. Also, apart from our studio website, we have a community Discord that's pretty active, and we're keen to encourage more people onto it for these discussions. The website for that is just GFSC, Geeks for Social Change .community. So we've got .studio, .community, same thing. So those two are probably best for now. Yeah.
Great.
So thanks for having me.
Well, yeah, thank you very much, and feel free to comment on this story if you've got a view on it. But it's just, as I say, the UK Consumer Digital Index 2024 published last week, this day last week. The UK's largest study of digital and financial lives. It was first published in 2016, and the report uses transactional and survey data, and they've completed varied research, they say, with over 35,000 people so far. Now, these are Lloyds Bank customers, so that there is that skew. But anyway, so the headlines from the report are that 14.2 million UK adults have the highest digital capability. 41.5 million people have used the internet to save money or shop around for cheaper deals. 8.6 million more people have the highest digital capability than in 2020. 22.6 million people think their skills need further improvement, and just 48% of the labour force can do all 20 work tasks, and that's from the essential digital skills list. So from the executive summary, there's a few headlines as well. Bargain hunters, over to 8 in 10 from the highest digital segment are shopping around for cheaper deals online. More than 6 in 10 from the highest digital segment are saving money online through loyalty schemes, such as air miles and supermarket schemes. Digital dynamos see a savings boost, so those with the highest digital and financial capability are saving 4 times more often and saving on average £1,100 a year more than those in the lowest groups. That's £180 more than the same time last year. The highest digital capabilities are almost 1.5 times more likely to be actively planning for their futures. Great if you think you can have a future with money, that's great. Taking stock, there are more people. Highest digital capabilities are more than twice as likely to invest their money and buy stocks and shares than those with lower digital capability. It says about 15.9 million adults, 30% of adults, could benefit from boosting their online safety. So concern there. More concerns about safety. About 6 million people, 11%, cannot recognize what content online may not be trustworthy, and 11.9 million people cannot use the cloud to access content from different devices. So the report goes on to say that 22.6 million people think their skills need improving, and self-led and online learning continues to be the leading preferences for people to build their skills. It does surprise me that so many younger people want Gen Z want our help. Young people, it says, are digitally confident but still want our help. In fact, young people aged 18 to 24 are more than twice as likely than those aged 60 to 69 to find it easier to learn digital skills from their bank. So, okay, well, I'm sure we'll be talking about it again in programs to come. But for now, thanks for joining us again, Kim. Really excellent
Thanks,
to
Kim.
hear you and all the work that you're doing. Good luck with that, and hope everyone has a great week. Have a great week. Thanks. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thanks. See you later.
Thanks.
Bye.